Hello, thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Chad Shockley, and I am going to be presenting my literature review comparing information technology adoption frameworks. I did this research project as part of my information systems research class with Professor Kristen Rainey. An information technology adoption framework is a model for understanding why users choose which technologies to adopt and which systems they choose to use. These are important for understanding why users make the decision to adopt certain systems and technologies and not others. Early frameworks were based on generalized behavior theories, not specifically to technology. There are three main frameworks that I'm going to be discussing today. They are the Technology Organization Environment Framework, also called TOE, which focuses on why organizations adopt new technologies. The definitions are fairly vague, which allows researchers to plug their own factors into the model for them to study how those specific factors impact organizational adoption of new technologies. There's the Technology Acceptance Model, also known as TAM, and its extensions, which focuses on why people adopt new technologies in the workplace. This has been extended to increase its explanatory power. And finally, there's the Unified Theory of Acceptance and Use of Technology, or UTOUT, which also focuses on individuals and is an attempt to combine multiple constructs into one unified framework to increase its explanatory power. The first of these frameworks that we're going to talk about in depth is TOE. TOE was created in 1990 by Louis G. Tornatsky and Mitchell Fleischer. This model is designed to explain how organizations adopt new technology within the influence of three contexts: the technological context, the organizational context, and the external task environment. You can see on the left an image showing the model and how the three constructs interact with each other to lead to technological innovation decision making. So as I said, the three contexts are the technological context, which are questions like what technology is currently in operation within the organization, and what technology is available for the organization to use. It's going to cover questions like how strong the network is, how strong the network team is, whether or not they can use cloud technology, things of that nature. The organizational context, which is going to be answering questions like the organization size, the organization structure, what resources are available, and how centralized is the decision making within the organization. And the external task environment, which is going to be things like regulations, market conditions, competition, the customer demand, and perceptions of the organization. All three of these contexts influence what technologies an organization is going to adopt and what systems they are more likely to pick. Researchers often use their own factors when using the TOE model. That's because this is a very vague framework, and it hasn't really changed since the 90s because, again, researchers can just plug in whatever questions in the technological context that they want to answer. They can plug in whatever questions in organizational or external task environment. It's a really flexible framework to be used for explanations. But that's what detractors would also say, is it's too vague to actually hold any explanatory power. The next model that we are going to discuss is the Technology Acceptance Model, or TAM, and its extensions. So TAM was first theorized by Fred Davis in his doctoral thesis in 1985, then formalized in a paper that he wrote in 1989. It basically states that user acceptance of a new technology is a function of the perceived usefulness of the technology and the perceived ease of use of the technology. Detractors say that this is too vague of a framework to actually hold any explanatory power. You're basically saying that someone will use my technology if it's easy to use and it helps them, which is obvious to say on its surface. Despite the detractors, it's still a powerful explanatory model that's used in a lot of studies to this day to explain why certain technologies are adopted and others aren't. But in order to improve on its explanatory power, researchers extended TAM to create TAM2. So TAM2 was created by the original researcher Davis, who put forth TAM, and a research partner by the name of Viswanath Venkatesh. Venkatesh is a very big name in the field of technology adoption models. TAM2 explains how social influence processes and cognitive instrumental processes impact perceived usefulness of a technology. What the two researchers discovered at the time of writing the paper was that most research was done on the perceived ease of use of a technology. However, the most explanatory power comes from the perceived usefulness. Venkatesh and Davis actually found that TAM2 accounts for about 60% of the variance in perceived usefulness. And they found that using social influence is a much stronger way to proceed with adopting a new system than by just forcing users into using it. TAM2 defines several new relationships that were not there in TAM1. These new relationships are how subjective norms influence perceived usefulness. In other words, the more an individual thinks that people who are important to them find the system useful, the more likely the individual is to find it useful themselves. This relationship is moderated by the user's experience with the system. Subjective norms and its influence on intention to use. People are more likely to use a system if they think important others want them to use it. The relationship is moderated again by the user's experience with the system and how voluntary adoption of the system was. How image affects perceived usefulness. In other words, the more an individual believes that use of the system will enhance their social status, the more likely they are to use the system. How job relevance influences perceived usefulness. In other words, the greater applicability of the new system on an individual's job, the higher the perceived usefulness. How output quality influence perceived usefulness. In other words, objective measures of how well the system actually performs its task. Result demonstrability and its effect on perceived usefulness, which is the more tangible the results of the use of the system, the higher the perception of its usefulness. Now, TAM3 is another attempt to extend the TAM model, and this was again researched by Venkatesh, and in this model he seeks to explain the factors influencing the perceived ease of use of technology. He describes 4 anchors that impact perceived ease of use, which are computer self-efficacy, perceptions of external control, computer anxiety, and computer playfulness. In other words, computer self-efficacy is how much a person believes that they are able to use a computer. Perceptions of external control is how much they think that the organization is supporting the new technology. Computer anxiety is how anxious they are when they begin to use a computer, and computer playfulness is how much they like to just be on a computer and play with it, video games or programming a new thing, whatever it might be. The researchers also found that there are 2 moderating adjustments once a user gains experience, and these are the user's perceived enjoyment of the system and the objective usability of the system once they have used it. This model is not heavily used in research due to how confusingly laid out it is. It does have strong explanatory power, but again, it's just very hard to use. And because there are so many factors, it's hard to really put into research. And finally, we are going to discuss the unified theory of acceptance and use of technology. UTOUT is another model that was created by Venkatesh, and this one was created by studying and combining the most powerful constructs within 8 pre-existing technology adoption models into one unified framework. The 4 constructs impacting use behavior according to UTOUT are performance expectancy, effort expectancy, social influence, and facilitating conditions. These 4 constructs are moderated by gender, age, experience, and how voluntary use of the system is. The researchers found that this model explains approximately 70% of use intentions and use behavior in technology adoption. So there's a lot of ways that these frameworks compare and contrast. TOE, the first framework that we discussed, is meant to explain organizational level adoption rather than adoption at the individual level. TAM and UTOUT are meant to explain individual adoption. Because of the difference in scope between these models, there are combination models that exist and are often used in research, such as TOE TAM and UTOUT TOE. UTOUT has the best balance of the three models with explanatory power and minimal complexity. Things that researchers could do moving forward is revalidating all of these frameworks and the data in the post-pandemic world, because so many organizations and individuals were forced to adapt to and adopt new technologies during the pandemic. It should be seen if that has influenced how new technologies are adopted these days. And validation of these models should continue within different cultures. They've been validated in Indonesia and in Portugal, but further adoption research should be done in different cultures to see how they apply. So in conclusion, understanding what influences user behavior in the adoption of new systems is critical to design more effective systems that are easier and more likely to be adopted by end users. Many frameworks already exist to explain user adoption of new systems within organizations, and the most powerful lever that one can pull based on these frameworks is social influence. Mandating that a technology gets used doesn't seem to impact long-term use behavior. However, social influence does. Thank you so much for joining me today. Here are my references, and I hope you have a wonderful day.